Okay, Twan, welcome to my show. It's the first time that you are here on Honkler Hangout. I am wearing my Honkler outfit because of the Honk Honk token that launched on the SLP blockchain about 1.5 months ago. It was first tradable on exchange.bitcoin.com. Honk Honk is talking about a clown's world. That's why I'm so colorful today. I stream almost daily on Twitch, and I do that since March of 2020. And 1 week after I started my stream, we got all the Corona news coming out. So, what better time for me to have a stream going on? We know each other since some time. I have asked you to be my guest, and this is the first time we all see you here. I already showed people a little bit about your history. I showed them a video where you were interviewed about the Panama Papers. And I would like to ask you, please introduce yourself a little bit, what you have done in the past, what you and how you see the future. What is your background? We would all love to hear about it.
Thank you. Well, I was born and raised in the Netherlands. I um, have developed as a teenager a fascination for the United States of America um, because I was taught in school that the United States of America is a very free country with a very free market and a very small government and very low taxes and very few regulations and no welfare state and free enterprise,
Mhm.
self-responsibility. The government does not take care of you. That's what I was taught in school, and I thought that was music to my ears. So,
They manage to tell you a nice picture in school, don't they?
well, they actually the way they phrased it was a little was more negative. They would say, "Well, you're on your own. There's no welfare state. If you get sick, they'll leave you to rot on the streets. If
Oh
you
yeah,
get
yeah.
they'll leave you to rot on the streets. If
Be
you
happy you're Dutch.
have you leave to rot on the street." That's the way they phrased it. I phrased it in a little more positively than they did. But um, anyway, the as a result, I got the feeling. The more I read and the more I found out, the more I got the feeling I was born to the wrong country. Like a transsexual is born to the wrong body. That's how I felt I was born to the wrong country, and I developed a very strong urge to emigrate to the United States. Um, and when I was 18, I traveled to the U.S. for the very first time, and I backpacked around the U.S. for 8 weeks in the summer of 1988. And what I found is that the impression that I had gotten through reading books, through school, through watching documentaries and watching movies and watching TV and and this picture I had developed in my mind of what the United States would be like was extremely correct. The country is just as I thought it would be, except for one huge exception. And that one exception was this idea that the United States has this tiny government with very low taxes and very few regulations and
Mhm.
a lot of freedom and free markets and free enterprise and no welfare state and all that. That turned out to be true in the 19th century. In 19th century America, that was all true. Uh,
And
but
then the
not
Federal Reserve happened.
yes, 1913 they introduced the Federal Reserve and the federal income tax, and that's when things started to change dramatically for the worse.
The
And
beginning of the end.
yeah, so as a result, the United States has become a huge welfare warfare police state, and and that was a huge disappointment when and I didn't discover it all at once in those 8 weeks traveling. I discovered more and more of it as I started reading more libertarian literature that was more critical of American government, and that was a huge disappointment. So this promised land that I thought I could escape to find freedom turned out to be in the past,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
available. Um, so in as a teenager, I was already interested in freedom. I was interested in political philosophy, um, and my instinct had always been the presumption of liberty.
Okay.
So my view was that if you want to restrict someone's liberty, you have to have a very, very good reason to restrict it. And if you do not have, if you cannot prove that you have an extremely good reason to restrict someone's liberty, then you shouldn't. Um, and so I was not a 100% libertarian because I had not yet reached the conclusion all by myself that taxation is legalized robbery, and taxes should not be low, they should be zero. I had not discovered by myself that regulations should be non-existent. I just was in favor of very light, very low regulation, reducing the regulatory burden and the tax burden as much as possible. Um, so I was not yet a 100% libertarian when I was a teenager, but I was, you might call me a classical liberal at the time. And in 1992, I was studying law at the University of Amsterdam, and I joined a youth organization that was called Youth Organization for Freedom and Democracy, that advertised itself as being classically liberal, liberal in the European sense of the word, meaning smaller government, lower taxes, fewer regulations, more freedom. And I discovered that I was considered a radical by them, and I considered them moderate socialists, because yes, I was also in favor of lower taxes and smaller government and lowering the regulatory burden and more freedom. But I wanted to take it 99% of the way, whereas the people that were in the Amsterdam chapter of this youth organization of freedom and democracy, they wanted a tiny little bit less taxation and a tiny little bit less regulation and so forth. So they were very much in favor of the status quo. They just wanted to make it a little bit freer. So there was a huge difference in opinion on just how free.
On your scale, they were not even halfway.
Correct. Yeah. Um, but I'm noticing that the sun is not making for a very good picture here. So maybe I should move.
Maybe, yeah, yeah, yeah. Maybe in general, Twan, we already spoke about it a little bit. Right now, the people that are watching the stream
Is it better?
cannot see any of us, but they hear us. They only hear us. I am recording this picture so I can upload it, and maybe we should just in the future have a couple of these moments together. And but we will see if so far it's going great. So just. Keep on talking a little bit. We are here with Toine Manders. He is talking a little bit about his history, his current state of being, how he sees the future, and he's introducing himself. It's his first time here on Honkler Hangout. So I'm explaining everybody. Apologies that I didn't capture the video in stream, but again, to all viewers, I'm recording all of it on my hard disk, and I will upload it to the YouTube channel as well once we're done. So you will get to see Twan later on.
Okay.
Please continue, Twan. Please continue.
All right. Yes.
And by the way, and he is sitting outside in his garden. It's lovely weather there. I can see some birds sometimes fly. At least I hear them. I see some bugs going over. So it seems like you're in a great location.
Indeed. Yeah. Well, so the other people in this organization, they considered me a radical, and one of them once told me about the existence of the libertarian movement. That's how I discovered there was such a thing as a libertarian movement. So I started going to libertarian meetings and reading libertarian books. And I was already, let's say, in favor of 99% freedom, so it wasn't that difficult for me to become a hardcore libertarian. So that happened fairly quickly in a couple of months. I'd say I became a minarchist within a couple of weeks, and an anarcho-capitalist within about 6 months.
All right, all right.
I discovered the libertarian movement in '92. In '93, there was the founding meeting of the Dutch Libertarian Party, where I was present. At the time, the libertarian movement in the Netherlands was very, very small. It had 125 paid subscribers. The sole Dutch libertarian magazine had 125 paid subscribers. The Libertarian Party could find only 11 candidates to run in the election. Participated in the national elections for the Dutch Parliament. And I was elected to be the prime candidate. We had a list of 11 candidates, and I was the first candidate on the list.
And that was the first time ever in the Netherlands that any kind of libertarian party participated in the elections.
Yes, that is true. I mean, in the 19th century, the Liberal Party was fairly, by modern standards, it was very much in favor of freedom. So, if you have a broad definition of libertarianism, then I'd say the 19th century Dutch Liberal Party was pretty good, but not opposed to the regulation, whereas the Dutch Libertarian Party was. So we were, in that sense, we were the first real libertarian party in Dutch history.
Okay.
Now, there were only 5 active people in the campaign, so we were very small. There was no internet to speak of, so we had to do things the old-fashioned way, stuffing envelopes to send them to the media to get some media attention. We did not win a seat in Parliament, but we did get more free publicity in a couple of months before that election that was held in May 1994. We did get more publicity in that few months before that election than we had, than the movement had in the decades prior to the formation of the Libertarian Party. The Dutch Libertarian movement started in the mid-1970s, so it had been around for 20 years, but had been largely ignored by the media. So in terms of...
so in that way, it was a big success, you could say.
So my position at the time was, and it still is, that our goal is not political power. Our goal is a free world. And an important intermediate goal towards the goal of a free world is spreading the ideas of liberty. And the Libertarian Party, to me, is simply a method to achieve the goal of spreading the ideas of liberty. And I think it's a very efficient method, because if you start a think tank or a society or some other organization to spread the ideas of liberty, you typically get ignored by the media.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in 1994, when there was no internet, that was basically the only way to spread your views, is to get attention in the media. By participating in an election, suddenly a lot of journalists that ignored the movement for decades now became interested and started interviewing me and publicizing these interviews in national newspapers and national radio stations and national magazines. So we got a lot of exposure. So in that sense, it was a success. Still, the active people were expecting success in the form of winning seats in parliament. That did not happen. As a result, they were discouraged and became inactive, and the LP went into hibernation. And I tried to keep the LP alive, and successfully so, by organizing meetings every month with a speaker and a debate or discussion afterwards. And when the internet came up, a fellow libertarian was willing to build a website and gain some attention that way.
I think in general in the Netherlands there is this monotone view, let's call it like that,
Yeah.
which doesn't really get, like you say, the media tries to ignore that. So I think once the internet came out and you got yourself that kind of a platform, things became a bit more easy, I think, to spread that message, to explain yourself.
Yes, it is true that small movements that were previously ignored now could advertise themselves through the internet. But that was not just true of the libertarian movement. That was true of other movements as well. But yes, I do think the internet has been very good to the libertarian movement.
It is a sense of freedom in a way,
Yes.
because although the governments try, but regulating the internet is quite difficult.
Well, the Chinese government seems to be very successful.
Yeah,
in
that's
yeah.
but that's more like an ethernet, like an intranet for China. But yes, that's true. And if we go to China, then you know the social, what's the name? What's the right word in English? The social points that they are now giving to people, the social credit system.
Yeah.
It can also work out quite bad, of course. That's also true.
Yeah. Now, during the course of the campaign in 1994, I met the founder of an organization, a firm called HJC. And this firm specialized mostly in advising military draftees on how to avoid a military draft. And he offered me a job to become a legal advisor with this firm to, well, like I said, advise draftees how to avoid the draft. And the job, because it was right up my alley. To me, the best way to make a living is by doing something that you're passionate about, that you really enjoy, that is very satisfying, and rather than just a way to make a living. And in this way, I could make a living by protecting the victims of the state against the state, by protecting people against the injustice that the government is trying to commit against them.
Yeah.
And so that, to me, was an extremely appealing job offer. So I took it, and this firm has been very successful in advising draftees. As a matter of fact, we've served over 6,000 clients, and when the draft was finally suspended in 1996, we could proudly announce that in the course of the existence of the firm, which at the time ran from 1984 to 1996, we had never had to tell any client, we're very sorry, but we cannot be of service to you anymore. You will now, unfortunately, have to be drafted.
So,
you have to put
100% success rate?
Well, some it did take a little bit of courage on the side of the clients, and not everyone has the courage. There were some clients that decided to no longer take our advice.
All right.
And subject themselves to the draft. But the ones who continued to follow our advice, all were able to avoid the draft successfully.
All right.
Yes. So in 1996, the draft was suspended. It has never been abolished. It's still on the books. It's still in the Constitution of the Netherlands, which is a weird constitution because it doesn't really enumerate our rights, but rather our duties to the government, such as the military draft. And and to the extent that our constitution does enumerate rights, it usually has exceptions as to these rights written in the constitution. For example, our Constitution does say that the people have the right to free speech, but it also says, unless prohibited by law. And it even goes so far as to say that commercial speech is not protected at all by the Constitution. It's never been abolished. As a matter of fact, a couple years ago, they introduced the draft for girls.
Yeah.
Now, of course, it's been suspended. Nobody's being drafted at the time. So in a way, it was symbolic. But what they're saying is, if we ever reintroduce the draft, if we end the suspension, then we're going to draft girls as well as men. Still, we had to find another way to make a living because the draft was suspended. A lot of people said to us, "We're very sorry for you because you must feel very bad that the way you make a living has now been destroyed." We said, "No, you got that all wrong. We were very pleased when the draft was suspended because we believe it is a huge injustice because it's a form of slavery.
It was a victory.
It's it's forced labor. In forced labor, maybe you may be able to justify it if murderers and rapists and robbers, if they are forced to work to pay compensation to the victims, that's something you could defend, but not to you cannot defend forced labor for innocent people. That's slavery. So we did have to find some new loopholes because that's what we enjoy doing. We enjoy protecting victims of the state against the state. We enjoy protecting them from the injustice the government tries to commit against them. So the way to do that, if you're active in the field of law, is by finding loopholes in the law that people can use to circumvent the government. And so we had to find a new target group, a new audience, and we decided to focus on the business owner. And our view is that the business owner is business owners are an oppressed minority. They are singled out by the government more so than almost anyone else, in the sense that most of the burden of regulation is on the shoulders of business owners. Most people that are not in business don't have a clue of the amount of regulation that exists because it doesn't really affect them that much.
They just work. They sign the contract to work and they don't know.
Same is true for taxation in a way, because almost all taxes are levied not directly from the taxpayer. Usually it is the business that must pay the tax and must pass it on to the employees through wages tax, through withholding tax, or pass it on to the consumer. And this is true for VAT, it's true for wages tax, it's true for mandatory national insurance, it is true for import duties, it is true for tariffs, it is true for excise taxes, it is true for just about any tax you can imagine.
It goes through the business owner.
Sorry?
the business owner is used as the
Yes,
person to.
against his will. He's an involuntary, unpaid tax collector for the government.
Yeah, yeah,
For instance, if you fill up your car with some gas at a gas station and pay the gas station owner 100 euros for your full tank of gas, then about 70% of that is actually taxes that he's collecting on behalf of the government,
yeah.
and only 30% or less is actually for the gas itself. Um, so and car people who drive cars in general are very heavily taxed in this country. Not just the gas tax, but plenty of other taxes as well. Um, so um, most people don't realize this. Um, when I was young, I read an article that was about the 10 most irritating things to the average Dutchman. And very high in the top 10 was municipal taxes. So local taxes, and I was very surprised at first. I thought, but that's such a tiny portion of the total tax burden. Why would that drop in the bucket be such a huge source of irritation? And then I realized why that is. It's because it's just about the only tax that's collected from the taxpayer himself. That is
Yeah.
not collected through businesses that pass it on by withholding taxes
It's more in their face.
and by adding it on top of the cost of the products and services. Uh, it's just about the only tax where the taxpayer gets a letter from the local tax authorities telling him how much he must pay from his bank account to their bank account, and with a threatening letter if he doesn't pay up within the deadline. And these letters keep getting more threatening all the time. That's why it's such a huge source of irritation. Um, and Well, since we consider business owners an oppressed minority that's worthy of protection, we decided to make them our new audience, our new target group, and to find loopholes in the laws that would benefit them. And the first thing we focused on was Dutch corporate law, which at the time was extremely business unfriendly.
Hmm.
At the time, if you wanted to set up a corporation, um, you had to get permission from the Justice Department first, which could take 6, sometimes 12 months to get. And if you had ever gone bankrupt, or had ever been director of a bankrupt company, or even been an advisor to a bankrupt company, um, or um had a record, a criminal record for violating some stupid rule, some time in your business career, then you wouldn't get the permission to form a corporation. But even if you did get permission, you still had to wait 6 to 12 months. Um, and there was a minimum capital requirement of about 18,000 euros in today's currency.
Hmm.
And um, we discovered that um, it was possible for Dutch business owners to shop around um, and look for an EU member state with a more favorable, more business friendly company law. Um, and we discovered that at the time the United Kingdom had the most favorable company law. And we discovered that it was possible for a Dutch business owner to form a UK company, an English company, um, because EU law protects freedom of establishment. So a Dutchman is allowed to establish a UK company.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The UK company then also has freedom of establishment, so it can establish a business in the Netherlands. Um, and This way, you can have all the benefits of incorporating your business without having to jump through the hoops of Dutch company law.
Yeah.
So we turned this into a product, English companies for Dutch business owners. And it was a success. We formed over 5,000 of them over the years. Um, and the Dutch government didn't like it, so they passed a law. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Have a drink.
Yeah, we started offering the service of forming English companies in '96. January 1st, '98, they enacted a law to make it more difficult, to basically eradicate the advantages of using an English company. So we took the government to court, and we took them to the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, and argued that this law was in violation of the EU treaty, in violation of freedom of establishment. And it took many years, as these things commonly do, but we won. So in 2003, the European Court of Justice decided that this law indeed was in violation of EU law, that this law was inconsistent with freedom of establishment. And as a result, the Dutch government had to change the law so that the new conditions they had set to make using a foreign company unattractive, they had to get rid of those conditions. And in the end, they actually changed the law to such an extent that they copied English law. So they got rid of the requirement to get permission from the Justice Department before you could start a company. They got rid of the minimum capital requirement, and got rid of other conditions and requirements as well. Now, this not only happened in the Netherlands; it happened in many EU countries, because the Netherlands was not unique. There were other countries such as France and Germany that also had these had onerous requirements, not as bad as the Dutch one, but pretty bad. They also changed their laws after this judgment by the European Court of Justice. So it became easier for German and French entrepreneurs as well to form a company. Well, that was the first battle, you might say, I fought with the government. And it ended in victory. But the government is a sore loser, so it was not to be the last battle. There would be many more to follow. And it took a long time, this battle. Like I said, the law was passed in '98. This judgment by the ECJ came in 2003. In the meantime, our product was a lot less attractive because it was uncertain how the ECJ would rule. So we decided to not sit in our hands, but expand our products and services. And we started looking for loopholes in tax laws, and we found them. And we started offering tax avoidance services to business owners.
And just to mention this specific service, because usually in the Netherlands and in countries like Ireland and such, companies go there to avoid taxes, but then they pay a little bit of taxes in the Netherlands to avoid taxes, for example, in the United States or in whatever other country they make their money, for example, by selling their products all over the world and then putting the headquarters of the company in the Netherlands and avoid a lot of taxes throughout the world, but pay a little bit to the Netherlands. But your company actually did it the opposite way, because you were gonna make these companies avoid taxes in the Netherlands, correct?
Yes, the Netherlands, in a way, has been a tax haven for many decades, in the sense that large foreign companies typically can use the Netherlands to avoid foreign taxes. So I believe that about 90%. So there is a top 100 companies in the U.S. So the 100 largest companies in the U.S., the Fortune 100,
yeah,
I think they're called. 90 of them have an establishment in the Netherlands, usually for tax reasons.
Yeah.
the Netherlands is usually of most interest for tax planning with regard to royalties, interest, and dividends and
There is
capital
a
gains.
huge
Those
amount
are
of
the
people, a huge amount of people in the Netherlands working for this as well, and this is our brain port in a way, or what's the right word for it? A lot of people make their money on it in the Netherlands. Let's just say it like that. And that's all
that is
endorsed by the
correct.
Dutch government because, well, all these Dutch employees pay, of course, their income tax and everything. And in the end, the Dutch makes a small surplus because all of these billions, even though it's just a fraction of a percent what they take of it, because it's such a large amount, the Dutch benefit, the Netherlands benefits in a huge way.
Yeah, the estimate is that about 10,000 billion euros per year flow through the Netherlands through Dutch flow-through companies. So royalties, dividends, capital gains, and interest. And yes, the Netherlands does levy a little bit of tax on the royalties and on the interest flowing through the Netherlands, a tiny amount. But the amount of money is so high that it still brings in quite a bit of money in the Dutch treasury. Not only that, there's a large amount of people working for trust companies, notary
Exactly.
firms, law firms, accountancy firms, who also make a living by catering to this industry.
Yeah.
So it is of a huge benefit to the Dutch economy.
And just to make it
Unfortunately,
clear, oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. I wanted to
unfortunately, over the
say
last couple of years,
there's a small lag, I have the feeling. I wanted to say your company did exactly the opposite, and they were helping Dutch business owners to avoid Dutch
that is
taxation
correct.
laws.
Yes, that is correct. I must say that unfortunately, over the last couple of years, the political left has been very successful in demonizing tax avoidance and tax planning, as if only very bad and immoral people would ever dare to do such a horrible thing as to avoid tax. And they've been very successful in naming and shaming uh, businesses that avoid tax and governments that facilitate tax avoidance. And over the last couple of years, the laws in many countries have changed for the worse, and that is true for the Netherlands as well. The Netherlands is no longer as attractive as it used to be, and there are plans to make the laws in the Netherlands even less attractive for tax avoidance purposes. So it is still true that the Netherlands is a major tax haven in the sense that there's still a huge amount of money flowing through the Netherlands. Uh, um, in the interest of tax avoidance, but things are changing for the worse.
Mm.
And you are correct that the firm that I was with, HEC, that I started managing as of the year 2001, that firm did the mirror image. So what most trust companies did is they helped non-Dutch companies avoid foreign tax by routing their structures, their corporations, through the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And we did mirror image, so we helped Dutch business owners to avoid Dutch tax by forming companies and foundations abroad, and making it possible for our clients to take advantage of the tax advantages that were to be had in other countries. So in 2001, we set up a company in Cyprus that actually became our head office. So we moved our all trust activities to the new head office in the Netherlands, and all company formation activities to the new office in Cyprus. I'm sorry, I think I misspoke here.
Yes.
Um, um, so just about all activities were transferred to the new head office in Cyprus. The only thing that remained behind in the Dutch office was a rep office, a representative office that gave information to potential clients on the trust services offered by our new Cyprus head office. And Cyprus at the time had a lot of tax advantages to offer, still does to a certain extent. but even more so at the time. Um, so that's why we chose Cyprus as the location for our new head
And
office.
for everybody, from example, from the Americas that don't know, Cyprus is part of the EU. Therefore, a lot of rules, legislation, and like you said, freedom of movement all goes. The Netherlands and Cyprus are kind of similar jurisdiction in that way.
Well, they're both used by foreign businesses to avoid local tax. That is correct. Um, and Cyprus joined the EU in 2004, and that actually was, even though I'm very critical of the EU, for our firm and for our clients, it was actually a good thing because uh, after Cyprus joined the EU, our clients could benefit from the European Parent Subsidy Directive, which made it possible to pay dividends tax-free to a Cyprus holding company and from a Cyprus holding company as well. It also made it possible to benefit from the EU the Royalty and Interest Directive. It made it possible to benefit from the very favorable decisions made by the European Court of Justice for tax avoiders. Um, for many decades, the track record of the ECJ with regard to tax avoidance was excellent because in conflicts between the tax authorities and tax avoiders, they would find in favor of the tax avoiders like 95% of the time. Because usually the tax avoider could claim uh, that some local law that was abridging uh, tax avoidance, they could usually argue that anti-tax avoidance laws were inconsistent with EU law, that they were in violation of freedom of establishment and the free flow of capital. So by Cyprus joining the EU, it all of a sudden became the best holding company jurisdiction in the EU.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it was good for our clients and therefore for us as well.
If I can go a little bit fast forward, because I've been showing your interview in this parliamentarian hearing about the Panama Papers. So at some point, the Dutch became so pissed off that they took more radical action. Let's call it like that.
That's very, very fast forward.
Yeah, that's very fast forward,
Something a lot of
uh, because I want to get to the now at some point, right? I mean, it's okay for me. We can talk hours more.
yeah.
Um,
Well, I'm happy to do a sequel.
yeah,
Uh,
well, I think we should definitely do that. Maybe we should just go and have the introduction then from the past, and then the next episode we can do a little bit further in time. If it's how you want it as well, Twan, but okay.
no, I'm happy to do that. No problem. All right. So in in 2004, a law was passed in the Netherlands to regulate trust companies, um, to make trust companies subject to licensing by the Dutch central bank. They had to introduce the euro. The Dutch central bank basically could no longer pursue its central bank activities because they'd all been transferred to Frankfurt to the
Mhm.
ECB. So they weren't fired, so they had to find something else to do.
They had a
So
lot of time.
yeah, so they thought, hey, let's pass some law regulating trust companies, and we can then license them, and we can visit them and check them to see if they follow the rules. We have something to do.
Mhm.
We can bother some people, and that's what they did. And they called me up, and they started asking me a lot of questions to determine whether HSC was subject to this law. So they were asking me questions like, do you offer trust services? Do you provide directors? Do you form companies? And the answer, of course, was no, because all these activities have been transferred to our Cyprus head office in 2001.
Mhm.
So, and I was representing the Dutch office, which which did not have any of these activities. So I truthfully answered their questions. They said, "All right, then we're going to take you off a list of trust companies because you're not engaging in trust activities." I said, "Well, fine." So that happened in 2004. Then a year or so later, we got a visit from an organization whose job it is to enforce anti-money laundering laws and laws to prevent the finance of terrorism.
It's always a good one.
Oh yeah, and they said that our firm was subject to these laws.
At the same time, the Dutch government was sponsoring ISIS.
Yeah. Well, this is 2005. I don't know if ISIS already existed at the time, but
Oh no, it was still Al Qaeda back then.
yeah. Anyway, so our lawyer, who happened to be very specialized in these anti-money laundering laws, even teaching a course to lawyers and teaching a course to these very people that were bothering me on how on anti-money laundering laws. That's how much of an expert he was and still is. He said that's baloney. It's just not true because there's a list of organizations that are subject to these laws. You're not, and your activities are just not on the list, so you're not subject to it. And I mean, providing information, which is all our Dutch office did. If that's subject to anti-money laundering laws, that means that any professor, any teacher that teaches economics might also be subject.
Yeah.
So, but these people wouldn't hear of it, so they kept bothering us and asking us questions, and they demanded they could stop by to ask us questions in person, and they wanted to have basically every record we ever had, every paper we had. They wanted it all to check for themselves if they really thought we were outside those laws, which they believed we were. We were not, obviously. So that dragged on for a while, and then it became very silent. We heard nothing from them, so we assumed they had sort of given up on it. And, well, what happened then? 2008, we did a campaign for radio commercials on Dutch national radio with the phrase "taxation is theft." So it was aired several times a day on a channel called Business News Radio, BNR, and we later even did it on the public radio station as well. And
that caused a stir.
Yeah, it attracted quite some attention. I was invited to have a debate with a professor in specialized in tax. So specialized in tax that he was a senior advisor to the Dutch government on tax policy. Leo Stevens is his name. And we were both invited to the studio to have a debate on taxation is theft. And he thought that it was a joke. He didn't think it was serious. He found out I was serious during the debate. And he was...
I think I've seen this debate. It's in Dutch, right?
Yeah, it's in Dutch, yeah. So his face turned red and he became very angry, and there was steam coming out of his ears. And,
yeah.
And he became...
It's a classic.
Yeah. He was a... he even said that if I'd been a student of his, he would have failed me. By which he basically admitted that he was corrupt. So it attracted a lot of business. In that sense, it was a success. I was looking on my website statistics to see who was looking at my website, and with large organizations, you can see it. And what I found is it wasn't just tax advisory firms and law firms and accountancy firms that were interested. But the Justice Department and the Finance Department were both interested too. They were checking my website too.
Yeah.
But I didn't think too much of it because we had a very strict policy, which is that we only do tax avoidance and not tax evasion. It's a matter of definition. Tax evasion is defined as saving tax by breaking the law,
Yeah.
which is what we refuse to do. And the alternative was tax avoidance, which means
To
saving tax,
optimize the law, basically.
yeah, within the limits of the law.
Yeah.
Um, and that's what we were specialized in. So we would say to all, it was in our brochure, it was in our seminars. I had seminars on tax avoidance. Um, so we always announce to people, um, we have this principle that every structure that we advise on, or every structure that we set up for a client, must be able to meet the test of daylight. So the success of the structure, the success of the strategy, must never depend on secrecy. Even if the tax authorities get all the facts on the table, they will still not be able to tax you because you have followed the law. That's our principle.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and well, one of the very first books, a little bit of a flashback here. One of the very first books that I read when I discovered the libertarian movement was a book by Harry Brown called "How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World." A book I can still highly recommend. It's still one of my very favorite books. And one of the chapters in the book deals with freedom from government. And one of the things he writes in his book is that government is, um, in a way, a paper tiger, because they cannot jail everyone, they cannot snoop on everyone, they cannot eavesdrop on everyone, they cannot spy on everyone at the same time. They just don't have the resources. Um, and he said, well, if you want to do something, but the government has made a rule that you're not allowed to do it, what do you do? And he said, well, one option is go to a country where you're allowed to do it. If you want to drive very fast, go to Germany. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, that's one way around it. Another way around it is to find loopholes in the laws, find legal ways to do what you want to do by restructuring, by tax avoidance, for instance. And that was very inspiring to me. This book. He also said what you should not do. He said what you should absolutely not do is form an action group and start a very vocal public organization to defy the government, to say we are going to be disobedient, we're going to disobey you, we don't agree with this silly law, this silly rule. He said if you do that, then the government will focus its very limited resources on you and on your group, and and they will screw you. Well, he didn't use that word, but that was basically what he said, and he's right, of course. And he also said, by writing this book and publishing this book, I'm putting myself in the spotlight, which means that I now no longer have the freedom to disobey government rules and edicts because I'm now a public figure. So if I do this, they will come after me. And so before I wrote this book, and before I decided to pursue becoming a public figure, I first made a decision whether it was worth it, whether it was worth to me to pay the price of having to obey the government um, because of the joy I get out of publishing this book, but out of being a public figure and spreading these ideas. And he decided it was worth it. And I agreed with him. And I also thought about this, and I decided is, well, if you want to be very successful in tax avoidance and become a big name in tax avoidance, you can't really do this by breaking the law because you will become a target. So the only way to become really successful in this line of business is to be completely within uh, within the law, to find only legal ways to avoid to stay tax. And yes, since that's the situation anyway, that means that I can now that I feel free to say publicly what I think about taxation. That taxation is theft. That it's legalized robbery. That tax avoidance is not just a moral right, but even a moral duty. Because if you can avoid tax and choose not to, then you're voluntarily handing over your money to the government that will use it to do some really bad things, like undermine our liberties, hire an army of bureaucrats that will write new rules and regulations and enforce them, and they will buy bombs and bomb people that are celebrating weddings, and they will fight wars on people that are no threat to us, and they will um, finance terrorism and all that. So,
We
if
could have a discussion on whether or not they are a threat to us, because if your society is in need for profits from oil, then everybody that also wants those profits is in a way a threat to your society, right? But please continue, please continue.
yeah, so um, I've taken these positions in public. I've been interviewed hundreds of times by public, by national TV stations, radio stations, magazines, and newspapers, and I've expressed these views, including the view that the government is a criminal organization, and um, and I was under the impression that since I follow the rules, government must follow the rules too. So they may not like what I have to say, and they might want to stop me. They might want to come after me. But since I'm following the rules, they really can't. They have to leave me alone. You might say that I was naive, um, even though I'm very critical of government and I'm very aware that the quarter of a billion people have been murdered by their own government in the course of the 20th century. I was naive enough, you might say, to think that the Dutch government was very different, and that the Dutch government would leave me alone. Um,
Yeah, I know what happened, Twan. I know what happened, but
well, maybe this is a good cliffhanger because we agreed
sure,
to
yeah, we are already running for 1 hour. I love to hear more from you because, well, I do this show, radio podcast, Freedom Radio, once per week. That's where we spoke for the first time. Of course, I have seen this video that I will definitely add to the description of this new video that we now just made. So people have a little bit of a history on what happened, right? But if you would like to come more often, I try to make a daily show here on Twitch. I'm streaming live every day, couple of hours. I give away cryptos in that show. I talk about freedom. Of course, I moved to a location near Liberland for the ones that don't know and watch this now, because I also see a lot of, let's just say that I have watched a lot of Mike Maloney in the past. I am a more economic background than a legal background. I have always thought that we will see a global currency reset in my lifetime, and that I have to protect myself from the forced money that, or the money that the governments force upon me. Here, this is a $10 trillion Zimbabwe note that I sometimes show to the people that watch my stream. I have the Liberland passport that I like to show to people, and I'm not saying that I know the truth of everything. I just have this feeling, I have this hunch that there's going to be a very big happening in my lifetime. And now, since 6 weeks, basically, I'm streaming on Twitch. After less than a week of streaming, all of the financial markets crashed because of what I like to call COVID 1984. Um, so I would love to have more conversations with you, and I think this was a great first introduction. That, well, we lasted for over an hour. Let's try and get the technique working as well. So the people that are watching live, we currently have 5 people watching live, so that they can see you next time. I'm still I'm an amateur. I'm just having fun here. I'm trying to. I'm at the moment, for example, I can tell you that I'm in a 60-hour lockdown, so I'm not allowed to leave my home. So I'm very glad that I'm streaming, but at the same time, I have to learn all the settings to apply all the settings correctly. So let's call it a day for today. Let's see if I can get this interview up on my YouTube channel, and so that next time we can, when we talk, we also see you,
All right.
and then we can
Thanks
continue
for the
from here.
invitation. And I'll be happy to come back soon.
Great one. Thanks a lot. And by the way, just to mention one last thing, I mentioned Liberland just now. I know that you're also a big proponent of Liberland. At the moment, there's a Zoom conference where they celebrate the 5th Liberland anniversary. Not that Liberland has its anniversary today, but hey, there is somebody who thinks that he can decide everything at any moment, at any time. So if the Liberland anniversary has to change a couple of days, who cares about a date, right? But let's also go into that subject maybe a little bit more in the future. And
Okay.
yeah, thanks for your time, Toine. It was great hearing from you,
Welcome.
and I hope you are well, and that we talk again next time, and that the weather will only improve. It looks great there.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.